couple of minutes while we're settling in here, managing traffic out there. Everybody apparently should be right in Boston. We would have that problem. So welcome again to the April 27th regular meeting of the Management Committee. With that, I'll go to Lori and you can do call to order for quorum. Oh, we don't anymore. Sorry, I'm moving from virtual to in person, so we're here. We have a quorum. Bear with me. With that, we'll do approval of the agenda, and we will need a motion on that in a second and a vote. So do I have a motion to approve the agenda? Is there a second? And by Pacheco, is there any questions on the agenda, changes, any alterations? Seeing none, then do we do roll call on this? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, no. Oh, say no. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We received the minutes of the Management Committee from April 13th. Everybody's had a chance to look at them and review them. If there aren't any edits or changes, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So,
Is there a second?
second.
Seconded by Pacheco. Any other discussions, changes to those minutes? Great. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed say no. That passes unanimously. Fantastic. We're now on to the non-consent business that is before us today. We have item 2022-106. It's the same week item. It's the FDA Affirmative Action Equal Opportunity Plan update. And we've got Cy Jordan with us and Ashante Payne. And I'll turn it over to them for presentations. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair. Hello, committee members. Good to see you in person. Cy Jordan, Director of the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, and we're here today to review with you the FTA Equal Employment Opportunity Program highlights that will be moving to the same week for council vote. Go to slide 1. That will be.
He's getting it up right now.
And I have here with me as well, Ashante Payne, Assistant Director of the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity.
Good afternoon.
It's great to see you in person.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if I should start crying or just hugging everybody. It's so nice. Having technical difficulty. Yeah, we've got talk about groundwater. I just don't think it's, you have to go back.
We can jump into the introduction and catch up with the slides.
That's a good idea.
We're used to multiple presentations, so we have them printed out as well. And so the council is required to submit a FTA Equal Employment Opportunity Program. That is the federal version, similar to the state affirmative action plan that we submit every 2 years, with the exception of the FTA is every 4 years. The council meets the threshold requirements for implementation for the full EEO program plan because we employ 100 or more transit-related employees and request to receive capital or operating assistance in excess of $1 million, or otherwise request or receive planning assistance in excess of $250,000 in the previous federal fiscal year. And so there are several categories of those who are required. We meet as the applicant, and also we have sub-recipients and contractors under our purview. Our council current program ends on April 30th of 2022. We'll be submitting an updated plan by May 1st of 2022. The council statement of policy is signed by our regional administrator, Mary Bogey. And again, this does require council approval, which is why we're here today for your review. The council, following the council's approval and submission to the FTA, the EO plan will be reviewed by the FTA. It will become effective upon the review of the FTA, and then we would publish the council plan. So we have a more detailed slide for you today because we wanted to give you all of the highlights of the program within the slide for your review. We would utilize this as well for proof of our review today with FTA in our regular reporting submissions. At the end of this presentation, which I will turn over to Ashante Payne to go through the details of the program requirements, we will be asking that the business item 2022-106 be submitted for approval of the 2022 through 2026 FTA Equal Employment Opportunity Program Plan, And again, we will request a council member vote same week at the council meeting today, April 27th, 2022. I will turn it over to Ashanti Payne.
Thank you, Chair, council members. Ashanti Payne, Assistant Director of the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity. Definitely glad to be here in person. It's just a different energy in the building, and definitely for this committee meeting. The FTA EO program plan has a full plan, which we are required to submit, has 7 components. I'm going to briefly go through them and what the findings are in our program plan update. And lastly, talk about our actions plans, how we will monitor and report on our plan. Again, as I mentioned, we have included a little bit more detail and wording in our slides. We acknowledge that for the reasons I mentioned. We want to, I'm not going to be speaking to that level of detail. However, we wanted you to have that for your reference, as well as the public, so that council members feel comfortable with the requested action. So of course, I'm not going to go through the statement of policy that's signed by Mary Bogey, so I mentioned that. But we'll talk about the dissemination a little bit. We are required to disseminate and publish our plan once it is submitted and receive concurrence from FTA. We do this in a variety of ways. The policy statement, along with other equal opportunity posters, are posted in conspicuous areas like break rooms and areas where employees congregate. It will be posted on the internal MetNet site as well. We will be conducting meetings with division leadership to go over specific findings or specific areas of interest with those specific divisions. And we'll be checking in with leadership as well periodically to report out on those progress and status of our plan. We have also implemented a dashboard that is currently available to all council employees, a workforce dashboard, and it is evolving. We're excited about how each day we find ideas to improve it, and council employees can go there and understand where we are in real time in terms of our progress towards our workforce equity goals and objectives. We also have that same responsibility for external dissemination as well. And we do similar things, and it will be posted on our .org page as well for the public to view. And any members of the public can come in and receive a copy here at 390 North Robert, and it's on file in the library. Go to the next slide, please. These are the individuals identified in the plan that have specific responsibilities. And of course, really those key individuals are the Regional Administrator, Mary Bogey, of course, Cy Jordan, and Marcy Simon, the Director of Human Resources. And then senior managers and supervisory staff as well have a specific responsibility to make sure that their teams understand the plan and they communicate the components of the plan with their staff. And all employees have a responsibility as well. Next, we move to the next slide. One of the things that I would like to point out that is different than our state plan, our state plan aggregates the data for BIPOC individuals and women into one. So our goals are identified as such. However, in our federal plan, gets into a lot more granular detail in terms of the disaggregation of the data, both by gender and ethnicity. And also organized around EEO job categories. I won't go through all of those, but I will mention in terms of our largest group of employees would be identified in the service maintenance workers, of course, protective services, our police officers, and The others kind of speak for themselves, with the exception of the paraprofessionals, which is probably our smallest work group. I think we only have 8 employees total in that work group. So just some of the highlights that are available there. Next slide, please. The utilization and availability analysis is probably the most key component of our plan. That is what drives us to develop or understand if we have underutilization and where we need to establish goals and timetables to help us address those that underutilization that we find, and also strategies. So this is probably 75% of the plan is in this component of our update. So you have to establish a labor market area to compare with. Ours is the Twin Cities metropolitan labor market area. And you have to define the availability, and we get it from census data and ACS data to establish our availability in those job codes that we just talked about on the previous slide. And we compare that to what our actual council workforce looks like. Then we plug that into the FTA worksheet, and it tells us where we are underutilized. And again, we did have some underutilization in each of our categories. I would just say that women, just like with our state program, we were underutilized in almost every category. Where we have the most underutilization is in our skilled craft job category. So in skilled craft would include some of our union workers that we employ both in environmental services as well as in Metro Transit. So as you'll see when we get to our strategies, there's definitely a focus on that job category in terms of how do we address that underutilization and the strategies that exist. I will say in terms of from our last plan to this plan, we have reduced the amount of underutilization and eliminated it in some of the categories. And there is a chart for reference of the, if we could advance to the next slide, that explains what our goals and timetables. FTA requires both short-term and long-term goals over the 4-year period until our next plan will be due in 4 years. We are also, next slide, please. Actually, we're going to advance to and then into the next. We're also required to do an assessment of our employment practices. So promotions, separations, disciplinary actions, training, and all the related HR and personnel related actions. And I've listed some of the highlights from what we found in those areas. You know, we do fill a good portion of our vacancies internally, 32.3%, and even at a higher rate when it comes to managers, 58 out of 74. We promoted women above their percentage in the council-wide workforce and promoted BIPOC individuals below their percentage in the council-wide workforce for both environmental services and Metro Transit. Of course, some of the other things, applications are of course down. Well, we're down during the pandemic. Also, we know from economists, Department of Labor as well, that we are losing women in the workforce. And some economists and labor strategists don't think some of those women will be returning to the workforce for a number of reasons. So as a council, we need to start thinking about that, how it will impact our workforce and the strategies related to address that gap. Lastly, I would like to mention that the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity has been partnering with HR and also other key individuals within the agency. But we're working on 11 key priorities that we have identified that will help us move the needle and make progress towards where we have underutilization. And some of those areas where we have identified that we have some issues that we need to focus on. Retention is definitely one of them, and retention of women and people of color is certainly an area that we are focusing on because they are leaving our agency at a higher rate than they are represented in our agency. So one of the things, and this effort is being led by HR's workforce development, is a re-engagement and outreach and engagement effort with community-based organizations. We also know that community-based organizations were hit hard during the pandemic. Some have had to close their doors. So we wanted to get an understanding of their capacity and then also develop mechanisms and strategies to both communicate, interact, and engage with potential applicants and develop that rapport so that they can help us meet our needs in the labor force. We also will be having the first employees and hires from our Ability internship program, which is new for the council. I'd like to say and happy to say that the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity will be having an Ability intern starting this year in May. And we hope to definitely learn from this pilot and hopefully get some ideas to how we can implement a program on a more permanent basis in terms of an Ability program that is a permanent fixture. As I mentioned, in the skilled crafts is where we have our highest underutilization or most underutilization. We are focusing in on workforce training in those areas. Some of them have been the construction inspector program with environmental services. We also have the fare box technicians program with Metro Transit and building strong communities as well, which was something that was started by council employees that we have recently turned over to the trade unions with council support. There's a council staff that is leading that effort as well. We are also working with HR in developing an equity scorecard, recruitment scorecard, and there are others involved from each of the divisions throughout the council as well in development of that equity scorecard. And they're close to finalizing that piece as well. And as some may know that we concluded an employee engagement survey that went council-wide, and we are starting to begin to communicate some of those preliminary findings and specific findings and tailoring that to specific divisions where it's appropriate as well. And hope to come back and share that information with this committee as well. Also, our racial equity training program, we started with leadership and council, and then also managers and supervisors. The next phase of that will be kicking off will be with other employees, both frontline and professionals. So that is going to be kicking off soon as well. And end of last year and this year, we developed a process for the employee resource groups, and we have some new employee resource groups that have been founded and approved. And that is definitely based on the research and what we know, key to retention and helping us retain our workforce. Also, I already mentioned our workforce dashboards, testing of applicants, reviewing our testing process, making sure it's compliant with federal regulations, and that we have, and that the testing is appropriate with the job that the applicants are seeking to fulfill. Our HR department and learning and development is created a career ladder workshops that also are kicking off. And then lastly, operator retention and separation. We definitely saw a really, when I mentioned that we are losing women and people of color at a higher rate than the representation, operators jumped out at us and really required our focus. So we have dug into that first to try and understand why and where it's happening. So there is a work group that is digging into that process, understanding where applicants and employees are falling out of the process, and then developing strategies to mitigate any issues that we finding there. So with that, Chair, council members, we respectfully ask that you approve our plan to be submitted to FTA for their concurrence. And then, of course, it will be published and made public at that time.
Thank you very much to both of you for the thorough presentation. So I'll turn it back to members of the committee. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Councilmember Lee.
Thanks for the presentation. On your last point about women and people of color leaving at a higher rate, do we do stay interviews to see why people continue to work for us and how can we those reasons? Question is on page 8. We're using data from the 2018 ACS. At this point, I'm concerned that that's 5 years old and we're 2 years past the 2020 census. At what point would the 2020 census data come into play with this plan?
Chair, thank you, Chair, and council member. Yes, the stay interviews, yes, we definitely do those. And also as part of our engagement survey work that we're doing with HR, we will be putting out a list of recommendations and actions. And stay interviews is definitely one of those because, of course, what we've learned is sometimes when an employee is leaving and you try to capture that information, then it's too late, and sometimes that's not always effective. So yes, to answer your first question. And the second question, yes, the updated census data and American Community Surveys data will be incorporated into our dashboards as we start to develop further develop out those dashboards. So as we're progressing and monitoring our progress towards our goals, that information will be updated in that system, in those dashboards.
Councilmember Lee, did you get your question answered as far as the data that we're using now versus current
Yeah,
data?
it sounds like it'll be updated.
Okay, that's what you'll incorporate into the dashboard?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Questions? Any other questions? Comments? Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you. Great presentation. I just have a couple of questions. The first one is more out of curiosity about what are the paraprofessionals that is only 8 in the council? I have no idea what those folks, who those folks are.
Well, you know what? I looked at it just in preparation in case somebody asked that question. So thank you, Chair. Thank you, Council Member. One example would be our real estate professional. And there was one of them. Bad memory. The real estate professional, and I will get the answers to that because it is we don't do a lot of hiring in that area, and it's really a kind of individual job category for our agency.
And I have a totally different question. It's just going back to the EO categories. I guess social and ethnic. And I know that you're taking those categories out of the federal guidelines. But I was wondering if we have those categories more disaggregated. Because I'm thinking that some of the communities that we have, it's hard to put them together under the bigger category because they face different challenges and opportunities. So for example, we have the Black and African American category. So I'm assuming that recent immigrants from Africa included there. But they bring other things and they face different challenges than the traditional African American community. Saying that the different challenges and skills that they bring, that recent immigrants bring, are different from 8th or 10th generation folks of Hispanic background. So I was wondering if there's a way to get more granular information, maybe not on this survey or in this for this particular purpose, but all of our other surveys.
Thank you, Chair, Council Member. We've had this discussion and exploring ways to do that. Of course, definitely this is compliance and regulatory, but our responsibility goes beyond that. So the first challenge for us is trying to figure out how do we capture that information from employees. And then if we want to do some comparative analysis, having that information captured in the Census and American Community Surveys data. So there are, even the example that you brought up is there's also challenges, especially with the 2 or more races for individuals. We know sometimes individuals don't always indicate when they're 2 or more races. So that's a long way of saying that, yes, we are working and looking at ways to capture more granular data like that. Of course, not for this, but for our purposes to understand where we are as an agency.
Thank you.
Did I hear you say that the feds have more disaggregated data in this report than the state, or did I hear that differently? You mentioned that.
Yes, Chair, the state aggregates people of color as just one entity. So we have goals that are for people of color. Although even with our state data and information, we break it down for our council purposes and disaggregate it further. But for the regulatory compliance aspect, our goals are geared, which is, I mean, when you have federal goals and you have state goals, that kind of, yes, you did hear that right.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? All right, Councilor Pacheco.
Just have a quick question, and I may have the numbers not quite right. But have you looked at right sizing your positions across the entity? What I'm saying that is that I was working with a group we called Workforce Next, and it was the largest organizations in Minnesota that were established by and for people of color. So the Urban League and some of the Academy and American Indian OIC, Northwest Indian OIC, CAP, CAPI, CLUES, LEDC, and we came together to look at what we were doing in workforce training. And there was a presentation at one of our meetings by a gentleman from the county, and I hope I get these right, but the point of you'll get the point of where I'm going with this is that they looked at, he came and spoke to the group, and he was saying that a couple of things they've done was in the area of right sizing. And it was looking at, for example, the engineers or janitors that they had across the system. It was required to have a boiler's license, have a driver's license. There was another element there. It turns out out of 108 buildings, they had maybe 6 had a boiler. And so that really was not necessary to have a boiler's license requirement. And thankfully, all of us here, all the positions were on a bus route. So do they have to have a license? They made that to be a requirement, and they went back and they did change some things based on what they found and what the actual need for that position was. And the other example he had was
in the area of, I think it was in the social services, they were requiring a master's, or no, a master's degree in some positions. But a lot of them just, they required a BA. And that they were getting master's level people applying for BA positions so they could move up. When they looked at it, a lot of them were intake workers and the like that could do it with an associate's. And that allowed for a broader pool. Some of the applicants actually received services, thought these were great jobs, didn't necessarily want to move on to be a master's. And so my point being is that we looked at across our system, how do we get the largest pool and they have a right size or the size that was necessary to do the job, not necessary to post it, but necessary to do the job.
Question, who wants to take that one?
Chair, council members, the answer is yes, and we have more work to do on that. And so one of the priority areas we're looking at, as we spoke to, as the bus operators, we're looking at where are the barriers and the challenges that are facing those operations. And we're looking at those nuanced areas around their position. But then we also have another priority area with the equity scorecard. We're also taking a look at our selection criteria. We have another number of other categories within that equity scorecard that we're going to be taking a look at from the time of actually making up our job postings, filling out our PCWs to the point of recruitment and hiring all the way through to the offer, and then continuing on with retention as well. We will be taking a look at that as the organization going deeper.
I think that's a really great point. I know, there are organizations trying to do it all over, but it's, and I think we've talked about it, but to push that harder, I know you guys have heavy workloads here, I get it. But I think that's an area where you can get people in that are very qualified and give them opportunity whereby, the process might stop them. And I think you guys are already on it, so I think it's good. But I think put a pin in that, remember, as you're coming back, just maybe some of those things that you're working on that relate to that would be great for us to hear. The other thing that I'd just be curious about, and not a rush thing, but if there's another report in the future, when you do conduct those state interviews and you pull out some of those nuggets that might be interesting for us to hear, that'd be kind of cool too. Is there anything else that the committee has? All right, then we have a request from staff, an action item before us that the Metropolitan Council approve the council's 2022 to 2026 equal opportunity or equal employment opportunity program update, and that would be then submitted to the FTA. Is there a motion? So Councilmember Lee moves. Second? A second. Seconded by Barber. Any further discussion? Seeing none then, all in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Aye. And those opposed, no. And that passes unanimously. So thank you very much for that thorough report. We really appreciate it. And this will be back to the council. We've got a couple of information items. The first one will be the result of a bond sale, and I'll bring up Mark Thompson, our Senior Manager of Treasury. This is always exciting as well. Good to see you in person.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Committee members, I'll introduce myself because this is the first time I've been in front of you, and it's nice not to be talking into a camera. So, Mark Thompson, Senior Manager of Treasury. Like I said, I started about a year and a half ago, so it's the first time in front of everybody. So this is awesome. And I'm here to present the results of our recent bond sale, which occurred last week. And before I get into the details, I thought I would give you some more good news that the council's bonds received AAA ratings from both Moody's and Standard & Poor's again. We've got a long couple decade streak going with getting AAA ratings, which is great. And I thought I would share, if I may, a few comments that the rating agencies said about us. I thought that might be interesting. So quoting, the council's strong financial profile reflects diverse operations that provide essential and important services to the 7-county region. They said the council has a large, robust regional economy supported by a highly educated labor force, comparatively high resident incomes, and sound demographic trends. Council has a strong liquidity position that remains stable throughout the pandemic. And they said we have a moderate debt profile and well-managed financial operations. And they mentioned our strong budgeting practices along with the history of strong performance to budget. So those are some of the good comments that they included in their reports. I would also like to thank the team involved in presenting to the rating agencies and obtaining our ratings. It's a long process that involves teamwork across all our different divisions. So I'd just like to thank everybody that put in their time and expertise in helping getting those ratings. Getting into the bond sale, it occurred last Tuesday on the 19th. Get into some of the details. The council approved on March 23rd, 3 different parameters resolutions, which put specific parameters around size and timing and interest rate. For us, it gives us the authority to go out and issue these bonds. So the council approved 3 different resolutions. One was to issue a bond to fund the transit capital projects, cash flow for the capital projects. Another one that they approved, another resolution approved funding for wastewater capital project cash flow. And the third one was to potentially refund some outstanding wastewater bonds from 2012. Mostly a successful sale. I think we all know that there's been very high inflation lately, and we're in a changing interest rate environment. And unfortunately, rates have spiked quite a bit lately. So they did increase quite a bit in the weeks before the sale. So that was unfortunate, but we're still in a relatively low interest rate environment if you look at historically. So that's good news. We were successful in selling general obligation transit bonds and the general obligation wastewater bonds. Unfortunately, the refunding did not work because of savings that we had anticipated getting really evaporated in mid-March to mid-April. So that was unfortunate. But unfortunately, on the refunding front, we did do refunding for 2020, 2021. Most of our debt was issued in the last 10 years. So we've got an overall debt portfolio that has very low interest rates. So that's the good news. Of course, we'll continue to watch for refunding opportunities, but with the changing interest rate environment, that will be difficult. So regarding the 2 bonds we did sell, we sold 53. Well, I'll also mention we had really good response. Typically we get 4 or 5 bidders. This time we had 6 on one and 11 on the other, which was, the more bidders we have, the more competitive it is, the better pricing we get. So that was very good. Just been kind of a lull in demand for municipal bonds lately, so we were very happy to get that many bonds bidders. So kind of some details, we sold $53.2 million of 10-year GO bonds for transit. That was under the cap we had set at $55.5 million. So a little bit less than the cap. We had set the parameters resolution at a 3% maximum interest rate. The bond sold at 271. And for the second issue, we sold $47.9 million of 20-year wastewater bonds. Those were also under their cap of $50.5 million. And we had set the parameters resolution at a 3.75% cap on those. They came in at 328. So those 2 were very successful. Best pricing we could. Both these bonds close in May, so that's what we'll get the proceeds. And we don't plan any other bonding until next spring. So that's our plan. So that concludes my comments. I'll have to answer any questions.
Great. Does the committee have any questions? Councilmember Gonzalez and Barber.
And just for my knowledge, have you noticed any differences between the sales that we had during the pandemic and this later one? In terms of anything, I suppose.
Madam Chair, committee members. During the pandemic, like I mentioned, we're very surprised at how many bidders we got currently. But not a lot of difference other than the change in interest rate. We sold some very large issues, some grant anticipation notes during the pandemic, for some capital projects that they were less than 1%. Now we're significantly higher. Those were shorter, so it's hard to compare exactly. But interest rates went up 0.75% in the last 30 days, before the sale. Kind of generally, it depends on if we're talking about a 10 or 20-year bond, but the last 90 days have changed. So the issues we did sell in 2020 and 21, incredibly low. We sold 4 or 5 bonds that were less than 1%, which is almost free money. So we're very fortunate to do that.
And I have just one, again, general question, just for my knowledge. Who's usually buying this? Corporations, individuals who buy?
Sure, Madam Chair, committee members. I mentioned a little bit about the lack of demand right now, and that's a lot of the big institutional buyers that are buying big size, like we sell, are bond funds, municipal bond funds. Some of the bonds will go to retail individual investors, but a lot of it goes to bond funds. And because of the spike in interest rate, those bond funds, as interest rates go up, the price of the bonds goes down. Right? So those bond funds are showing a lot of loss. The clients are pulling their money out. People who are buying into bond funds are exiting. So those bond funds aren't as big of a buyer right now. So that's why I mentioned market is seeing a little less demand. But I think we did great. So bond funds are big institutional buyers, big blocks.
Thank you.
But that's the end buyer. We're selling it to a broker dealer who will then sell it to the bond funds.
Councilman Farmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to say really nice job, because this is a very confusing market right now in general,
Yes.
with all things related to finance, and it's changing daily, and just constantly. And to have that kind of outcome, I think, in this environment, and to have that many groups interested, really says a lot about our financial stability. So, too. But yeah, it makes a really big difference. So it's really good news.
Anything else? And I would just add my thanks. You do a wonderful job, and we've done some other great things in your predecessor as well. And that's why those comments are coming through on our AAA. And you do an excellent job of managing the funds here. And really thrilled that we had that many people wanting to buy the bonds, right? It's just like you said. How much did we miss the refunding by? How much was that?
Madam Chair, the refundings are set to target, in our parameters resolution, we put a target savings, percentage savings. It's not an interest rate cap. So we were trying to save generally. I'll just throw out that there is a statute that says for certain types of refunding, which you have to get a 3% savings. 3% savings of your debt service, right? That doesn't apply to every single type of refunding, but that's kind of a general guideline. And we were shooting for 290, so we were accept a little less than the statute or guideline. And it came in about half of that. So 1.5-ish % savings we could have grabbed, but if you're looking at, we had to have discussions with our municipal bond advisor on what is an appropriate amount to take or not take. And they advised us not to try to sell it at all, which we didn't. So we pulled it a couple of weeks before. Because the savings they were completely zero, but it didn't make sense. As far as the number goes, we were initially, when we first started looking at the refunding, we were hoping for, it was a little over $3 million savings over the remaining years of the bond, which was about 6 years. And that dwindled down to less than $1 million. So by the time you pay $200,000 to issue a bond, it just didn't make sense anymore.
We got to enjoy the ride
Yes.
now, and now we're enjoying. I guess. And for any of us who've been around for a while, these are still really good rates. So
Yes.
yeah. So thank you very much. If there's nothing else on this, we appreciate the great work again, and see you when we have another bond sale.
All right. Thank
you. Thank you. With that, we have an item on our information agenda which requires us to close our meeting, and I'll turn to Councilmember Gonzalez, who will make a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that this meeting also be closed to the public pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13B.05, Subdivision 3B, and applicable case law, so the committee can discuss with our legal counsel in a confidential setting, attorney-client privilege matter.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Pacheco. And I'll just let everybody know that a public body by majority vote in a public meeting may decide to hold a closed meeting under, again, section 13B.05, subdivision B of Minnesota Open Meeting Law to discuss attorney-client privilege matters.